All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining. Today we'll be doing a workshop on network automation with Red Hat Ansible. A quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do a quick introduction here, and then we're going to do 10 minutes with the training team from Red Hat, training resources overview. Make sure that everyone understands what's available from a Red Hat resources perspective to help with the delivery of Ansible, OpenShift, etc. Next, we're going to do a quick overview of F5 with Ansible, led by Todd Namba. He's many of One Technology's customers are both Red Hat and F5 customers, so we thought that would be a good topic to cover for everyone. And then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. Jerry, Trey, and Jason are going to lead the workshop, get hands-on access for everyone to familiarize everyone here with how to use Ansible to automate networks. So with that said, we're going to hand it off to John, who's going to do the overview of the Red Hat training options.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And hey, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Again, I'm John Walter. I'm the solutions architect here at Red Hat for the training and certification organization. So let me real quickly share my screen. So we wanted to, let everyone know what options we had from a training perspective, specifically around Ansible and Ansible for networking. But also give you some exposure to the ways we train, things like that. So obviously as part of our distribution, Ansible Network Automation makes up a huge part of the modules that we ship. In fact, I believe it's currently over a third of the modules that we ship in Ansible Engine are for network automation, right? And we work with vendors across the space to create and certify these certify these modules to ship with our distribution. And I think everyone understands why we would want to automate these processes, right? Configuration automation on the entire stack from system to access to core services. We need to be able to test and validate existing network states. We need to make sure things are in continuous compliance, and we need to be able to work with a common language across all of these vendors within your environment. You can just see kind of an example of what one of these kind of basic playbooks would look like. In this case, targeting Cisco devices. If I jump ahead a couple, you'll see the same thing targeting Juniper devices. If you didn't really pay too much attention, I didn't give you very much time. The point, the takeaway is that, the way that we're structuring our automation, it's a common language throughout, no matter what device or devices, what vendors that you're targeting. The key being that we want to be able to equip you with the exposure and the tool set to be able to automate across all of these variety of vendors the same way, have the skill set to really scale that automation. So let me jump into some of the courses and the curriculum that we have. We essentially have multiple entry points to teach people the language of Ansible. You'll see here, really looking in that middle section there, the network automation or network administrative focus courses are really what we're going to be talking about primarily. But essentially, this is a course to not just teach you how to install and manage Ansible on a centralized node, but to teach you the language of Ansible, right? We want to be able to give you hands-on experience working with multiple vendors, developing at first very simple, and then moving into much more advanced automated tasks across Cisco and BIOS and Juniper, Arista, F5, all of the above, right? The entire stack. Now, for those of you that may be kind of cross-platform, maybe responsible across the networking side, but maybe at the OS level as well, we do have some training that essentially teaches those same concepts, just using different use cases. So exposure to how we would do some basic and advanced administration automation across Linux and Windows is available as well. If we just highlight here on this Ansible for Network Automation course, really this is all of our courses are going to be hands-on. They're available to you in multiple ways. So the way that you are able to consume the training is completely up to you. We have self-paced options. We have the ability to have an instructor walk your team through this as well. Most of these classes are typically going to be about 4 days, although, working with myself and my counterpart, Alex Unger, who's also on the call, we have a lot of flexibility to be able to customize this curriculum as well to really match your use case. But again, this is to essentially take you from, zero to hero. This is our, 101 level course that is purely on the Ansible engine side. Now we know that, a lot of the times teams are not, especially with network automation, are not just going to be at the engine side developing these playbooks. They're also going to be using Tower to create more complex workflows and things like that. And so we have also developed the course to essentially build on the skill set at the Ansible engine level, developing playbooks. How do I, manage these larger projects? How do I make these scale? And ultimately, how do I leverage something like Ansible Tower to really operationalize our workflows? And so typically what our customers are doing when starting with network automation is going through a course like this, which will give them a lot of the exposure to different use cases, a lot of the modules that we ship, actually getting hands-on experience within our lab environment, nothing on your end that you have to spin up and configure on your own. And then from there, moving into our advanced course, which again really builds on the foundational skill set that you've established in that first course, but getting into essentially infrastructure as code, right? What are coding best practices within Ansible? How do we manage these projects with something like Git? How do we implement a CI/CD pipeline with something like Git and Ansible Tower? How do we leverage Ansible Tower to really scale our Ansible footprint? And so, we have a few options in as far as delivery, as I mentioned before, but definitely we want to target these first two courses probably for the Ansible side, and then obviously, as Matt mentioned, our courses are going to cover the entire portfolio. So when it comes to implementing, managing, operating, or developing within something like OpenShift, we certainly have curriculum in that regard as well. That will go from that kind of level 1 to your more day 2, day 3 operation side. So with that, I'll pause if there are any questions.
John, I would also comment, with this audience being primarily state, local, and education focused, there are especially priced training courses and sort of unlimited all-you-can-eat training courses that are aggressively priced to account for government. So if there's interest in that, we've got some pre-built stuff we can send to anybody. Just send us a note and we'll get it. We can get you those options over.
Yep, great point there, Matt. And feel free to reach out to myself or to, as I mentioned, Alex Unger, who oversees all of our state, local education customers within North America. We can certainly always work with you. We're always going to be flexible, and obviously because of COVID-19, we are I guess, extremely aware of training needs and being able to prioritize this in times where, we can't really rest on our laurels, so to speak. So, feel free to reach out to us. Obviously, we have a lot of ways to package this, especially for, situations where, multiple courses are going to be necessary, which is typically the case. As Matt mentioned, we have a kind of an all-you-can-eat training offering as well that, again, is completely hosted for you, really give you exposure to our entire product portfolio.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you very much. Todd, are you ready for your screen here?
Sure.
Todd, you need a more social distancing friendly background screen than hanging out downtown.
Oh, there's nobody around me. I've got
Yeah,
a
it is quiet. You're
poll.
probably safe.
We're good. Thanks, Matt. So hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Todd Namba. I am an SE with F5. Take care of the Colorado market along with Miranda Domenico as my account sales person. So today I was just given an opportunity to give you a short presentation around F5's kind of effort to help automation within your networks and your company, whatever. So at first I thought I'd kind of go over an imperative and declarative thinking around the API. So this is good to know to see where we've been and where we're going and where we're gonna go in the future. So imperative is kind of like, this is an API, imperative API. It's like asking a 4-year-old who knows nothing about food or where things are to make you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? So you have to tell them, hey, get the bread out of the cabinet, take out 2 slices, put them on the counter, put a layer of peanut butter jelly, right? So you have to give them step-by-step instructions on how to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The declarative model of an API is more like going to a restaurant, right? You look at the menu, there's peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you just order that and they know how to make it. They might ask you a couple questions of like maybe what flavor jelly would you like, but other than that, they can take that information that you give and make you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So why this is important, F5 has always been API, it's always had an API built into our TMOS system, but it's been imperative, right? You've had to give an API to build a node, and then you had to do another API to put that node into a pool, and then a monitor on top of that, and then build a virtual server, and then hook that virtual server to the pool, and so on and so forth. So it's very step-by-step kind of way to build an application. So what we've done is a couple of years ago, we've come out with the declarative model. So we have a declarative API interface, which we can now post a bunch of information to an F5 box and have it do what it needs to do. So examples of that. Oh, this format did not come out very good. Sorry about that. Anyway, so what our goal is to take you from soup to nuts, right? From nothing to an F5 onboarding, ready for configuration, to configuring the application, to monitoring that application. So this is kind of the route that you take to put an F5 in an application in the public for your users, for your employees, what have you, and then use Ansible to do all that for you. So in this case, right, in like a public cloud of some sort, like AWS or Azure, we have built cloud templates that Ansible can go in and initiate and build an F5 for you. Once that is done, you can use declarative onboarding to do the basic needs that an F5 needs to have before you start building an application. So like user accounts, NTP servers, DNS servers, VLANs, routes, stuff like that, things that you need to get it ready for the application. And then once that's done, ready for the application, we have App Services 3, or AS3 is what we call it, where you can post, again, what we have. It's a JSON file with all the information you need to build that application. You post that one file and it builds the entire application for you. And then once that application is built, you guys always want to know how it's performing. We have telemetry streaming, which again, we post a JSON file that tells what logs, what monitors, what things to send to logging services like Splunk or Azure Analytics or things like that. All of this information is available to you at this URL, clouddocs.f5.com. So things about the declarative onboarding, AS3, telemetry streaming, in addition to the modules that we have for Ansible, are all on there. Nice little labs and quick start guides on how to use everything. So very, very valuable URL to remember and go to and use. So I thought I'd do just a little bit of a demo to kind of show you the benefits of this declarative API. Oh, and here's clouddocs.f5.com. As you can see, AS3, declarative onboarding, telemetry streaming, F5 Ansible modules. All right, so I've got here pretty much a blank F5, right? There's no virtual servers. Oops. Sorry about that. Let me log in again. No virtual servers, no partitions, configuration. I've got, oh, let me get rid of those. Delete. I've only got one NTP server. I've got one user. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to send this JSON file, which is our declarative onboarding portion. And as you can see in this file, I'm actually going to be adding 2 more NTP servers and creating a couple users. So this is very valuable, right? As instead of having to go to each of your F5s within your enterprise, you can just send this JSON file to each of your F5s and have all these things done for you, right? So if your NTP server changes enterprise-wide, you can make that change in this file, post it to all your F5s, and your work is done. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this file and I'm going to post it to the F5. Looks like it was successful. So if I go back in here and now look at my NTP servers, let me refresh that. There we go. I now have all 3 of my new NTP servers. If I go back to my users, instead of that, just that one admin user, I should have 2 more. Yep, user 1 and user 2. Again, so just posting this file to the F5, I've created all this, whereas, right, in the olden days, you could do a bunch of different API calls to do this, or in the UI, having to log in, going to all these different places and doing this configuration. The second thing I'd like to demo is the AS3 portion. So here, this is a sample declaration. As you can see, I am creating this application called Juice Shop. Here, I've given it my virtual IP address. I'm creating a pool. I've put a monitor on it. And then here are my pool members. So I'm taking this a little step further where I'm actually using service discovery, which in this case, this F5 resides in AWS, but it could reside anywhere. What it's doing is it's going out to AWS in this region, going to a certain VPC and looking for any web server that has these tags associated, so Porsche and Panamera. So any web server that has those tags in it, it's going to pull it in, create it on the F5, add it to this pool, Juice Shop pool, and then associate that pool with the virtual server. So let me post that. Again, that looks successful. Give it a couple seconds here. All right, so we see a new partition was made with Juice Shop. Within that partition, we have our application, our virtual server. Also, we have our Juice Shop pool. And then within that pool, we have these automatically service discovered web servers pulled in from an AWS VPC. And now if we go to that IP, nod to my demo gods, it works, right? So with one declaration of a JSON file, I've created a application, right? A virtual server with a pool, monitors, everything you need to publicly make that application available. So hopefully that's compelling to you guys. Use this AS3 declarative onboarding to help you streamline your release of applications and make your life easier.
Hey, Todd, there were a few questions.
Okay.
Skip Smith wanted to know what security controls prevent this API from being abused.
Sure. So of course, you need authentication to the F5, right? So that is either a token that is generated that lasts for, I think, maximum 5 minutes. So, right. So as soon as you generate that token, you have 5 minutes or less to send your configuration. You can do basic authentication, but tokens probably more recommended.
Perfect. And then Carlos asked, since this was apparently released 2 years ago, which F5 versions would that apply to? I'm particularly interested on big IP related stuff.
Sure.
And then he elaborated basically wondering which big IP versions have this API if it was released 2 years ago.
So it is on 13.0, I believe was the first version that this was available.
Another one, what issues around the tokens, and are they rotated?
Right, so I think I kind of mentioned that, right? So once you create a token, it's only good for a certain amount of time, maximum 5 minutes. Once that 5 minutes or whatever you configure to be that timeout is, that token is no longer good, and then you have to generate a new one.
Perfect. Unless I'll keep an eye out here. I'll keep one eye on the question tab. But with that said, Todd, thank you for the presentation. I'd also note to everyone on we're doing a follow-up webinar in the next couple weeks with F5's NGINX platform. It's an NGINX 101. It will also be a workshop like this where you'll have access and the ability to play around with with the tool set. So thanks, Todd. Next up, Jason Rist is going to kick off the actual workshop here.
Yeah, mute myself. And I think I'm already sharing. Can anyone confirm?
I see it.
All right, perfect. All right, so thanks, John, for going over some of the Ansible networking stuff. And thanks, Todd, for going over some of the F5. I will note real quick that the stuff we're going over is kind of more generic networking automation, but there is a specific F5 workshop. So if you're really wanting that, we can work with you on that. Just click through here. All right. So yeah, I'm Jason Rist. I'm a solutions architect with Red Hat covering state and local government, healthcare, and education for Colorado. And joining me is Trey Prins and Jerry Corum. Trey is kind of my cohort whatever, sorry, in Texas. He's kind of doing the same thing. And Jerry is a sort of sales specialist, and he helps kind of all over the place. So he might be helping you as well. And again, this is a sort of compressed version of the workshop due to time constraints. But since it's virtual, it should be fine to get through everything. This class will be up for a few days as well. And I can paste a link here pretty shortly for the, I don't know why it switched backwards. For the Ansible workshop. There's a bunch of workshops and it's all open source and it's all available on GitHub. So I'll paste a link here shortly. And like John already went over, we've got some more formal training via GLS, and there's a 4-day network automation class, as well as some more specific stuff for F5. Just to go quick introduction, we'll be going over kind of the basics of Ansible, how to make configuration changes, and the templating language that we use for that, which is Jinja 2. And then we'll also be going over how that works exactly. Trey will go over that right at the beginning here. We use a control node to do that, and it's not working directly with the routers, but we'll also be going over Ansible Tower, which is sort of our user interface that also allows us to scale the IT infrastructure. So I'm just going to skip over this one, kind of the same thing. So basically, you know, you guys might have already experienced this in your environment, in your company, that Ansible, or excuse me, automation happens all over the place in different ways. So the idea here is that are we doing everything in silos, and can we make it more holistic for the entire organization? So, you know, security might be doing it one way, infrastructure might be doing it another way, and networking might be doing something proprietary as well. So Ansible helps you essentially do those all simply and effectively. And there's no agents, so everything's sort of happening on Ansible's systems, and then kind of poking out as from there to all the different systems. You can get going pretty quickly, and it allows you to orchestrate the whole life cycle, and it works with tons of modules. This is kind of the brain dump of everything it works with. As you can see on the network column, that's kind of the big one: A10, Arista, you know, F5, Lenovo, Jupyter, etc. So yeah, this one's kind of just telling you that we're here to make your automation journey easier. Stop automating in silos, and everyone can contribute to stuff that the organization is using, and everyone can contribute, you know, repeatable things that the organization, that's specific to your organization, and then you don't have to, you know, sort of rewrite things all the time. You can extend upon things that other people have already written that's very specific to your organization and holistic. Ansible Automation Platform isn't just the Ansible engine. It's Ansible SaaS, and it's Ansible Tower. Ansible Tower allows you to scale the IT automation and manage complex deployments and speed productivity. And Ansible Engine is the base that runs the playbooks, and we'll go into that further. So it's more than just automating infrastructure; it's automating process as well. And I'll pass it over to Trey for going over the Ansible engine.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Share my screen. All right. Okay. Can you see that? Okay, Jason, you seeing that?
I'm muted, but yes, I am seeing that.
Okay.
It looks great.
Okay, good. Good deal. Okay, so in this section, what I'll be focusing on is really the first layer of that cake that Jason was talking about. So really the foundation of Ansible. So taking a look at the language and some of the components, and really trying to answer the question, what does it take to automate with Ansible? Like, what is it that I need to do as a user to actually automate something? So this is a high-level depiction of the different components of Ansible, but when you want to automate with Ansible, there's really two things that you need to focus on, two things that you need to do. And the first one of those is actually put together what's called a playbook. And like Todd was talking about, within this playbook, what you're really doing is describing what it is you want the end state to look like. So you don't really have to understand how to go about it, all of the details. You just really need to understand what it needs to look like. And so if we dissect the playbook and we look at really the key part of a playbook, it's really just a series of tasks that are used to describe what that state should look like. And so here we have a sample task that is pulled out of a playbook. And there's a couple of components, a couple of key things about this that I want to point out. So the first is, when you look at the formatting, you'll see that the task starts with this dash. In the YAML language, which is what a playbook is written in, this really signifies a list. So in the playbook, you can have one or more tasks that are contained that describe different things that you want to happen to the endpoint. So then within a task, you have a couple of things that are, I would say, required. So the first one is this parameter called name. And strictly speaking, it's not required, but it's highly recommended that you put it in there because number one, it serves as a good form of documentation. So if you just look at a playbook, you can pretty much go through and look at all of these name parameters and get a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the playbook. The second thing is if you use the name, then when you're actually executing the automation, that information will be printed out. So it gives you a good way to debug the playbook and kind of see where things are within the automation. So that's the first key thing. The second thing that you specify is the module. And so here, the module that's being specified is called template. And this is where I think the real power of Ansible really comes into play is with these modules. And John talked about these. I think everyone's kind of talked about the concept of modules, but in essence, the modules are the things that do the work. So they know and understand the details about how to open a firewall port or how to configure an NTP server on a router, things of that nature. So you need to understand, okay, these are the NTP servers that I want to configure, but the module will understand, okay, this is how I really need to do it on the endpoint. This is the command. So when you specify a module, then the way that you actually tell it, this is what I want things to look like, is through module-specific parameters. So with this module called template, you can see that we have two parameters that are specified. There's a source and a destination. And we're going to look a lot more at the template module, but essentially what this module does is it starts with a base file, and then it goes through a process of what's called rendering to actually build out a customized configuration file, and it's going to place that in the destination on that remote host, okay? So this is really the key part of a playbook, is actually defining the tasks. Now, when we look at Ansible and how it actually works, it really depends on what kind of device you're working with. So as Jason was talking about, Ansible can be used for pretty much anything on the network. So storage systems, networking devices, servers like Linux host and Windows host, that sort of thing. So when you're working with something that you can log into, primarily Linux systems and Windows systems, the way that Ansible will work is it actually will take the module code, it transfers it to that remote device, and it executes it over there. For networking devices, it's a little bit different. And when you look at the module code, typically like for Windows systems, it's written in PowerShell. For Linux, it's written in Python. And on those systems, they have like a Python interpreter so they can run the module. For networking devices, they don't really have a way to run Python, for example. So the difference is these modules are actually executed locally on what's called the control node. And the control node is simply where you install Ansible. And so you'll actually be working on your control node today in the lab. So just to kind of give you an idea of how things are working a little bit underneath the covers. Okay, so we talked about the first thing, which is actually defining your playbook. And that really consists of defining tasks that are going to use these modules. The second piece then is describing, now I've got this playbook, I need to know what endpoints I want to run against. And so that information is described in what's called an inventory. And there's a couple of ways to work with inventory to describe that. So one way is just with a text file, and an example is shown here. And what we're seeing is, first of all, with this brace notation, this bracket notation, we're introducing the concept of what's called a group. And a group is just a group of one or more endpoints. So in this web group, we have 2 servers that are listed. We have a database server, some switches, and so you can see how that's filled out a little bit. So that's one way to specify an inventory. Now, typically, what we'll see, though, is you would use some other source, like a CMDB, or perhaps think like Todd was showing in one of his examples. He was referencing some inventory that was in Amazon. And so by the same token, within the Ansible environment, you could use something like Amazon or Google, for example, as your source of truth. So if you had automation, for example, that went out and provisioned a new system using EC2, that would be automatically populated within the Amazon environment. And then you could use Ansible to go out and query that and know that whenever you run the automation, it's always using the latest version of your inventory. So a couple of ways to do it. Again, this is the file-based method that we're looking at here. And it's actually the method that we'll be using in the lab today as well, that you guys will be going through. So if we look a little bit more into this inventory file, you can start to populate it with things that are specific to a host using using variables. So variables are part of the Ansible automation language. So here in this inventory file, you can see that we've got various routers that are specified. And the names such as router 1, for example, are the names that are referred to in the playbooks. So in a playbook, you can say, for example, I want this automation to run against router 1 and router 2, and just refer to them by these names here. Now, if those names are in DNS and you can do the lookup and resolve the IP, then you don't need to specify anything else. In this particular case, what we're showing is a way to specify an IP address that Ansible should use to connect to those hosts. So Ansible_host is a variable. It's a special variable within the Ansible language. And if you specify it, then when you reference router 1, Ansible is going to use this IP address to actually connect. So this is an example of just a fairly simple example of showing how you can specify a variable that's associated with a particular endpoint. Now, you can actually get a little bit more sophisticated as well with groups. So we showed a very simple group structure before, where we had database servers, web servers, networking devices, that sort of thing. So here we expand on this a little bit. So we have different groups that are shown here. These are groups that are, again, actually part of the lab that we'll do today. So we have 4 routers. We're actually going to be working with 3 of these. We've got a slight issue with 1. And then you can see that for each one of these, we are specifying a connection variable. And then we're just specifying another variable that is something that you may want to use within your automation. So as you're writing your automation, you can define variables, modify those, and then use those to control the execution of the playbook. One of the other things that you can do with groups within an inventory file is actually group them together. So down below, what we're looking at is a group called routers. And then the children keyword says that for this group, it's going to consist of the 3 groups that I've defined up here, the Cisco, Arista, and Juniper. So if you wanted to run something that targets everything, instead of listing these 3 groups individually, you could just simply refer to it via routers. All right, so in addition to specifying variables at a host level, like we've seen before, and with this example here, you can also specify group variables as well. And the way that you do that is you just name the group, and then the keyword to use there is vars. And so here we're specifying some parameters that Ansible will use as it tries to connect to these endpoints. And these are common variables that would be used across every member of the Cisco group. So in this case, it's just through router 1. Okay, so then we start to combine this together then. We take our task and we take this information about the inventory and the actual endpoints that we want to target within the inventory. Then we start to build up our playbook as a whole. So if we dissect this a little bit, you can see this is really more of a complete playbook. And we start off again with a list. So we have a dash here. So this signifies a list again. And this first level is really a list of plays. And so here we have a play that's called deploy VLANs. And again, just like with the name associated with a task, this is something that's going to print out when you actually execute the playbook. So that's our first parameter. Then the host parameter is saying within the inventory file, what endpoints is this play actually going to apply to? So here we're looking at just the Cisco group. You could list everything. You could list a combination of hosts and groups if you want to do that. This is just simply saying, this is what I want to run against. We have another parameter in here that we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we actually get into our tasks. And so in this case, again, we have just one, and we're using the NXOS VLAN module to automate the configuration of a VLAN. And so that's really the key parts of it. So we have our playbook, we have tasks associated with that playbook, and then we have an inventory that we're going to run against. And then within the play, we specify within that inventory as a whole, what are the endpoints that I really want to target? Okay, so with that in mind, what I want to do is actually walk through the first exercise. And this is really just kind of getting you in a little bit acclimated to the environment. So everyone is going to have their own environment to work with. And so you're going to have an instance of Ansible that you can make use of. And then, like I said, there's really 3 routers that we're going to be working with, and they're different flavors of routers. So when I talked about playbooks and inventory, when you actually execute the play, the automation, if you're using the command line, you run a command called Ansible-playbook, and as you would expect, you specify the playbook to run. You can also specify on the command line the inventory, but the other thing that you can do is actually predefine some things in a configuration file. And we've done that in the lab just to simplify it and kind of cut down on typing. So just want to walk through some of that a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to hop over to my console, and you will have access to your environment. And I'm just going to run this command. And I want to take a look at the version, but really what I want to take a look at here is this line that talks about the config file. So when Ansible runs, it's going to look in different places for a configuration file. There's a system-wide configuration file. There's also a system-wide inventory file. Typically, though, you're not going to make any changes there. If you want to override anything or augment it, you would do it in a different location. One location to do that is in your home directory in a file called .ansible.cfg. So if we take a look at that, And I'll do that in VS Code. We have a few things that we're overriding from the global configuration perspective. But the one I want to call your attention to here is this inventory file. And again, you'll have your own inventory file in your environment. So using this keyword inventory, I'm saying it's in this location here. So whenever I run the Ansible Playbook command, I don't need to specify the inventory file. So again, we're just trying to make it a little bit easier for the lab. If we take a look at that, this file here, then you can start to see a little bit about what we put together in the lab. So first of all, for the group all, which is essentially all encompasses everything, every endpoint, every group within your inventory file, we're defining some variables associated with that. And in this case, it's really the private key that we're going to use to give us access to our endpoints. Then we have a group called routers that's building up, that consists of all the different types of routers that we have in the environment. And then the other pieces of this are fairly familiar, I think, that we've gone over before. So you'll be able to take a look at that, but we just wanted to kind of go through that, give you a lay of the land, and let you know when you're running through the lab, some of this has been set up to make it a little bit easier. And it's things that you can do when you set up your Ansible environment as well. Okay, so I believe at this point, go back here. Let me go ahead and turn it over to Jerry to take us through the next couple of sections.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Desktop number 2. Okay, can everybody see that? Hopefully. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I can see it here.
Yep. So we're going to talk about exercise 2, and then we're going to get you guys set up with student numbers and get you hands-on and running some of this stuff. So real quick, this is kind of a good example of a networking play that we have that works on Cisco. So we already broke that down a little bit, so you guys know about the name parameter, why that's important. It's actually part of our best practices course. So it's that important, right? Your targets, talking about hosts, in this case, this particular Playbook is targeting our Cisco group. So it's targeting just Cisco routers. And then we have the gather facts option to say, no, we don't want this kind of generic gather facts option. I think prior to version 2.9 of Ansible, gather facts only worked on like Linux hosts, Windows hosts, stuff like that. 2.9 and forward, it's going to work for networking devices as well. So like Trey said, all of these modules are in there that are kind of the pre-made modules for you guys to work with. There's over 4,000 of them now, and you can use any of them you want. There's really good documentation at docs.ansible.com, which you'll get hands-on with a little bit later in the workshop as well. So you'll figure out how to find those and find the ones that do the tasks that you want to actually do. So the networking modules in particular always have a prefix for the vendor that you're working with. So you'll always see like a fax command and config option for most of them. And then that prefix or that star will be the vendor's prefix. So EOS, IOS, all those things. So just pay attention to that. It helps if you're searching through the documentation as well to know these kind of shortcuts over here. Know that Cisco iOS XE is iOS, and then, you know, that kind of stuff. So keep those in mind, although Google is an excellent search tool for finding the right Ansible modules and finding examples of other people using playbooks to manage their infrastructure that you can actually copy and paste relatively easily. That's one of the advantages of working in the open source community and having a community of users who share their playbooks, is that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. So we saw this playbook run. you've already seen this part, so we're just going to skim over this and get you guys hands-on as quickly as we can. But this is a playbook that you can run in production to add these SNMP strings. So keep that in mind. If that's something you need to do a lot, you can copy and paste this and use it as it's ready to go for you. It does display output. Now, Skip asked the question about like how like a security team can tell what is going on when people are using Ansible. So Ansible at the command line level is very much something that's like installed on your Linux server, and you have an Ansible config file that can be configured to push this output to something like Splunk or Logstash is an option. So there's some built-in plugins that push this information out to a centralized logging location that you can take advantage of. With Tower, it's actually just kind of a drop down and you're ready to go. Tower also centralizes those logs for you as well. So it's a little bit different of an experience when you're using the Tower interface versus using the command line interface. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. We'll paste this spreadsheet in here. We need to get everybody assigned a student number so that nobody's accidentally operating in somebody else's environment. So we'll go ahead and take this and paste it into the chat. I don't know, Jason or Trey, do you want to take care of that real quick?
Yeah, I can help with that. I'm pasting it right now.
Good. I can't seem to copy and paste this in presentation mode. So.
I got it. It's in the chat right now.
Cool. So go ahead and just put your name next to a student number, claim it as your own, pick your favorite number, whatever. And then we also will send out, oops, I did not mean to stop sharing. I meant to stop presenting. Let's try that again. We can also send out the link to this page.
Yeah,
so what
that's also at the top.
That's also in there? Okay. So what you do once you claim your student number, find your student number on this list on the 7B87RH demo site. When you click on it, it'll expand out and it'll give you your Visual Studio Code link and password, your SSH link and password, and your Ansible Tower access and password. Now, if you are in an environment where you can't SSH out, you can actually leverage VS Code because it's running in server form on the Tower server, so you don't necessarily have to open up your terminal environment and SSH out. You can do that from VS Code. So if you're locked down, I know a lot of state and local customers tend to be locked down. So that's why we started including this VS Code stuff. Once you have access to that and you get in, we'll go ahead and start the actual exercise. So if you, let's see, what did I do with the link to the exercises?
Jerry, should we give them a few minutes and maybe do a small break right here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break while you guys are getting everything set up. Looks like we're getting some names in here, so that's good. And then, oh, one of my smarter colleagues put the links in here for you guys. So you'll need to go ahead and open both of those links in a tab. And then if you want, you can finish exercise 2, which is executing your first network automation playbook. It should take about 15 minutes, but we can go ahead and say we should come back at like, what do you guys think, 9:15?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
And I'm going to wait about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to actually start doing this with my screen shared, so you guys can either wait and follow along if you want, or go ahead and work ahead on your own. Either way is fine. And of course, if you guys have any questions, just let us know.
Is anyone having trouble getting to that spreadsheet?
So while you're doing the exercises, there are going to be some exercises where it's going to look really easy to copy and paste things. I would encourage you to actually type those things out. That's kind of an important step in learning this. YAML, the language you're writing in, is white space sensitive because it gets kind of converted into Python, which is also white space sensitive. So you need to be very aware of the white space, and sometimes copying and pasting can mess that up. So if you do have trouble running a playbook that you're creating yourself as part of an exercise, or even if you're already doing playbooks on your own for your own environments, just make sure you're paying attention to white space. It's very important. How's everyone doing?
Sunitha, are you still having trouble? It looks, I'm not sure, you said I'm not able to access, but then you said okay, so if you still need help, let me know. Okay, great, thanks.
Hey, Colin, this is Trey. I see your question in chat regarding the SNMP configuration. So just for clarification, you're saying that you wrote a filter module to get, you wrote a playbook to configure SNMP, the SNMP configuration, but then you had to like go back and remove some components of that. And I guess I was just kind of curious, does the playbook, does it actually go in and completely replace the original configuration, or does it just try to make updates to it?
Jerry, I think you can get going on kind of going through it.
Okay, that works for me. Go ahead and start this real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and keep talking. If you guys want to keep working, go for it. But I'm going to talk my way through doing this, right? So I'll just start it at step one. And I'm going to make this bigger. See it? Okay. So, and go to the networking workshop folder. Make sure we're actually there. And we'll read that playbook out there. This is the playbook from the example that I had up on the screen. So you've probably already seen that. And then we'll go ahead and run it. And don't worry if you have student 2, I'm on a different environment, so I won't be messing you up. Also, when you're naming your playbooks, please name them something other than playbook, or you're going to have a bad time when you try and remember what you're actually doing. Be descriptive, right? So it looks like this ran. It did make a change, and then this is something that we can actually check. So we'll SSH to router 1. And then show P. And it looks like those came over. That's good. And then in step 5, it talks about the iOS config module being item potent. That's an important concept that goes back to that declarative type of infrastructure management that Todd was talking about. We try and make sure most of the modules in Ansible are item potent. You can declare a state you want it to be in. If it's already in that state, then the Ansible play isn't actually going to redo anything. It's just going to check that it's in the state and kind of stop there since it's already okay. Like it says, since it's already in the state, we're expecting if we actually run that playbook again, instead of seeing changed equals 1, we'll see changed equals 0 because it was already in the state we were expecting it to be in. And then you just get this okay instead of this changed message. So that's the important concept for managing things like configuration drift. You can check to see if something has drifted without actually, and then fix it as well. Then it looks like they want us to update this playbook. I am actually going to use the Visual Studio Code link to do this. If you haven't used Visual Studio Code before, this is almost the same as using the desktop version. the desktop version basically just runs inside of a self-contained browser anyway, so there's not really a lot of limitations here. Same thing, open your networking workshop. This is the same playbook I was looking at over in the terminal window, and I'm just going to add that second line in there, and I'm going to follow my own rules and type it in because copying and pasting leads to unnecessary troubleshooting. Go ahead and add that in there. Ansible server, community, Ansible tests, RO. If you're curious, these dashes mean that we're forming a list in Ansible. So it's making a list of these commands that it's actually going to run in order. And then Visual Studio Code actually automatically saves this. You don't necessarily have to hit save. If it was unsaved, you'd see a little dot over here. So if we cat that playbook again, you should see that it's already over there without me actually hitting save. So some quality of life things for the rest of this workshop. And then what it's going to have us do is run that playbook again, but we're going to run it with a check flag. So any playbook can be run in a check mode, and that's a mode where it's going to run and it's going to see if it needs to make a change, but it's not actually going to make that change. So we'll go ahead and run that. We're also adding this verbose tag so that it, or parameter, so that it gives us some more information about what we're looking at. You can also just do -v if you want. You don't have to type the whole thing out. And then the -check option. Same thing applies in Ansible Tower. You can run an Ansible Tower job in check mode as well. And then instead of logging that it actually made a change, it's going to tell us what it actually needs to do. So you see that it's this updates, it needs to actually run this. Now it does say change equals 1. It didn't actually change that. So step 8 is actually verifying that. So we'll SSH back into router 1. And then show run. So you can see we still just have those 2 original strings in there, not the third one that we just added. And then step 9, we'll go ahead and actually run it without the check mode and without the verbose mode. You can leave the verbose mode on there if you want to take a look at the more detailed responses that it gets. There's several levels of how verbose Ansible can be depending on what you're actually doing. I tend to not run it with it unless I'm troubleshooting something. Run that. And this time we got a change. So we'll change that one thing. We'll go ahead and SSH back into router 1 and show pipe. And now we have that third string that's in there that we were looking for. Is everybody getting close to done or finished? I'll go ahead and wait about 2 more minutes, and then we're going to talk about exercise 3. So I'll wait until 9:15. If you're done, go ahead and take a break or ask a question if you have questions. So we'll go ahead and talk about exercise 3 now. If you're not finished, you're welcome then to kind of keep plugging away. I'm going to talk about what we're doing in exercise 3 for a few minutes, and then we'll actually do exercise 3 as well. So if you jumped ahead, that's also fine. Don't worry about it. You might be able to speed through this whole workshop pretty quick. So let's jump back in over here. So exercise 3 is really to introduce you to the Ansible documentation and then gathering facts. So gathering facts about your network devices tends to be where we start, right? You don't want to just make changes kind of and assume. You want to look at the state something's already in before we start making changes. So it's an important first step in understanding what you have already and the state it's in, so that you can start modifying that to either bring it into what you expected it to be in, or make the changes that you need to make. So the module documentation is actually really cool. If you go to docs.ansible.com, you can find a module index. I tend to actually just use Google for this and just prefix whatever I'm searching for with Ansible. So you do Ansible networking modules, you'll find that the first result is usually the networking modules index page. If you're working with cloud stuff, Ansible cloud modules for whatever cloud you're working for, like Ansible GCP, works really well to find those modules and the list of those modules. So definitely leverage all of that. And then all of the documentation is broken down kind of the same way. We talk about what it does, we talk about the arguments and parameters that you can pass to it, and then what it returns. So an Ansible module can return a value that you can use later on in your playbook, which we'll see here in a few minutes. So the facts modules are what you use to actually gather facts from your devices. So like we talked about before when we were talking about, *_facts, commands, all that stuff. Same thing applies here if you're looking to just gather facts. These don't make changes, they just look at what's going on and bring that information into Ansible for you to use. Now, if you take a look at this, the fact modules return structured data. What that means is it's data that you can navigate inside of Ansible. It's essentially like JSON, so you can use dot notation to find things. In this particular case with the networking modules, you can actually just call these variables. It's like net isotope or net system versions and different things like that. They become available later in your playbook for you to reference. So you can make a decision. Let's say you're checking this particular Cisco router, and if it's version 16.09.02, you don't want to do something in particular because maybe it's not a feature that's in that version, or maybe it's just not necessary. It's already built in that way. You can have a play that'll affect other versions. Oh, if it finds one that's this particular version, you can say, no, skip it. So there's some really good conditionals that you can start working with when you start gathering facts from your systems. This is an example of a fact gathering playbook. We tend to use a lot of the Cisco examples in here. So if you're not a Cisco shop, there are examples on the Ansible documentation for all of the others as well. This particular one is just gathering router facts from the server. And then when you run that, you will see this response. But where are the facts? I don't know. They're there, they're just, you couldn't see them. So you can either run it in verbose mode, like we were talking about, so you can add that -v, and then you can actually see what it got back. Important. Or you can also display the output using the debug module. So the debug module is just a way of printing a variable or a message with a variable in it. So you can kind of start to see, Jason mentioned that we use Jinja 2 as a templating engine. So that's what lets us kind of on the fly, if you see these two curly braces surrounding a variable name, at runtime, Ansible will actually replace that with the value of the variable. So you'll get that Ansible net version from that. And then when you run that, you actually get this kind of clean response where you're getting messages. And again, you have the option to sheet that over to your logging system if you want as well. So you can log what's going on, what your current versions are. You can also create reports. There's actually an entire Git repository dedicated to making reports like this using Ansible. So you can run it against your inventory and generate these HTML reports. This is just an HTML document that is a template Now, we don't necessarily have time to go through and set that up during this workshop because it takes a little bit, but it is open source. It's out there in the workshop environment for you to check out and use for yourself if you would like. So exercise 3, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'm going to wait about 5 minutes before I start it. So we'll shoot for completing that around, well, so I'm in Arizona, so for me, it would be 9:35. But if you guys want to take a break, we could probably take a break and shoot for coming back around 9:40.
Hey, real quick, everybody, just so everybody's aware, Trey sent me a note. This will be available on YouTube and our LinkedIn page for anybody that wants to access it. We'll also carve it up into subsets so that it's easier to track down the components that you're looking for. So keep an eye out for that in the next day or two. Trey also asked if I could splice in some of his vacation photos from Puerto Vallarta. We'll make sure those are hidden randomly in single frame shots, Trey. So everybody has to find them.
Great, thank you so much.
Tuck behind the slides a little bit or something. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start running through exercise 3. If you guys are ready, hopefully everyone's got a good start on that. Go ahead and stop sharing. Oops. Didn't mean to stop sharing. Meant to stop presenting. It's the second time I've done that. All right, let's try this again. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the documentation parts from step 1. You guys have probably already done that. But definitely, if you are interested in doing things like taking certification exams, for example, the new Red Hat Certified Engineer course for RHEL 8 is actually Ansible based. So you definitely want to know how to access the documentation. So it's gonna be important for you because you don't have access to Google. So learn how to use these Ansible doc commands to find information about the modules you're interested in. It's going to be important. So we're going to make a new file. And again, I'm actually just going to bounce over back into Visual Studio to do that. If you like VI or Nano, you're welcome to use those things. Use what you're comfortable with. Just make sure if you're using one of the command line tools, if you have the option to configure something like VMRC so you can see like the column lines and make sure your parameters and everything are lined up correctly, it's going to go a long way to making your life a lot easier. Go ahead and call this one facts.yaml. And then every playbook starts with those 3 dashes at the top. It is optional in some cases, so you don't have to have it in a lot of places, but it's good to get in the habit of putting it in there, just in general. So again, we're working on that Cisco group, and we are not gathering facts. So the other advantage to using, I don't know if you guys saw that, but the other advantage to using something like Visual Studio Code is that you get some of the IntelliSense that Microsoft's products are known for, right? So you can get some auto completion. There is an Ansible plugin for Visual Studio Code that enables some of that, and it's probably the most well done. It's getting better in things like Atom.io and stuff like that too. So if you have another preferred advanced text editor, just check and see how the modules are doing over there. And here in step 3, we'll go ahead and add the tasks. Oops, I'm doing this. Get the step. It's important that you note that colon is there. Don't skip that. Every module has to have that, even if you're not providing parameters. So make sure that's in there. Then what we can do is go ahead and run that. So again, we're gonna start the hard way. Okay, I forgot to put -v on there, so I don't actually get to see the facts. We're gonna have to rerun that with verbose mode. I'm just gonna use the -v instead of typing it out. Now you get access to all of these facts that we can use later, for example, in the debug module, or to make decisions for other modules as well. And then we will switch back here and add a couple more tasks. So one of the Ansible best practices, if you go through, like there's an Ansible best practices course, there's also some really good documentation on docs.ansible.com about best practices. It's to always leave some white space between your tasks. Just makes it easier to read. Sometimes the parameters get really complex and have a lot of variable substitution in them. So you want to have that white space to make it easier for you to read if you're skimming for something. Now that we've got that one updated, we'll go ahead and rerun it. And we'll rerun it without that -v command. You can run it with the -v command too if you want. It doesn't really matter. But since we added those debug statements in there, we're actually going to get the information that we're interested in anyway. So you can see that my iOS version is 16.09.02 and it's serial number. So you can start using that to collect information about your servers and how their current state. Maybe that one needs an upgrade. I don't know. So that's really all there is for exercise 3. If you guys are all done with it, let us know. And then Trey is actually going to take over for exercise 4. Once you guys have had a chance to complete this and maybe, refill your coffee if you need to. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
All right. I think I'll and dive in here. And Jerry, Jason, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep, exercise 4.
Good deal. All right, so we've taken a look at Ansible, created some playbooks, seen how to execute those against some of the routers in our environment. So now we want to take a look at how can I then use Ansible to configure my network devices. And in order to do that, we're going to look at a couple of things. So in essence, what we're trying to get to, at the end state is essentially a way that I can specify, a template like a skeleton of a file, and then combine that with device-specific information that's stored in variables, marry that together in order to define what the configuration should be for a particular device. So the way that we'll do this is by taking a look at a few components, and we'll start with something that we've been talking about before up until this point, which is the whole idea of variables. And so we talked about group variables. We've seen how we can specify variables in an inventory file. But as you start to work with Ansible more and more, what you'll find that when it comes to specifying the value of variables, you can do it in a lot of different places. Generally speaking, the idea is to keep it simple, so that don't put them in a particular location just because you can, but try to make it such that it's readable. So we've looked at doing that with an inventory within the inventory file itself. Another place that you can do this, where you can specify your variables, is within a directory where your playbook is defined. And so there's a special directory called group_bars that you can create. And inside of that directory, you can have a file for each of your groups. So before we had the group Cisco, so if I wanted to specify group variables for that Cisco group, I would just have a cisco.yml file, and I would just populate that with my variable definitions. Like we saw with the special group all, you can also create a file called all.yml, and those variables would specify to everything that's in your inventory. This is an aside. You can do the same sort of thing with host variables. So in the inventory file where we had a host and then we had variables associated with that host, you could create a host bars directory and then populate that accordingly. So again, different ways to do it. And so that naturally kind of leads to the question of, well, where do I put what? And it's really up to you. You could put everything in the inventory file. You could put everything in a groups bars file. Either way would work just fine. But in terms of general best practices, the advice is to take anything that's really related to how you connect to the endpoint and associate that with the inventory. So when we looked at things like the Ansible host name, there's an Ansible connection that talks about how do we actually connect to the device. Those relate more to how we actually connect to the device, so we would put that in the inventory file. Other things really kind of like the data model that's describing, well, this is what the value of my NTP server should be, or other configuration parameters about the device. Those would typically go in the group bars folder. So again, you could do it either way you want, but that's really the convention for that. So if we take that approach, then, again, our end goal is we want to build out really just this configuration template. And then we want to take specific device configuration values, marry that with the template to create a configuration file for that particular device. So here, what we've done is we've separated out that device-specific information. We put it into our group bars directory, and we put it into the all.yml file, which means this applies to all of the nodes, all of the groups that are defined in our inventory. And so we have this variable called nodes, and then for every router within our configuration, 1, 2, 3, 4, we specify an interface, and then we specify the value for that interface. So what I've got then is one file that I can go to specify the actual values, and then we'll see here in a little bit that I can then take this, use it with the template to generate the configuration file for that router. So this is the first piece, so it's really defining what the values would be. So then the second piece gets into the actual templating mechanism. And we introduced this early on when we first started looking at a playbook, and we looked at a task, and that task was using the template module. And so that's what this is really referencing. So within Ansible, it includes the Jinja 2 templating engine. And we'll take a look at that, but essentially it provides you a way to build out just, a skeleton file that has actually, code in there. We'll take a look at that, and variables. And then whenever you run the template module, whenever you use that, it's going to take the variables and the template and render that into a device-specific configuration file. And then we can pass that off to the device to actually do the configuration. And there's different ways to really pass it off. I think Jerry was talking about earlier, if you look at the different modules for working with the networking devices, they're oftentimes more of a generic way to do it, and then device-specific ways to do things, just depending on what you want to do. And so it's the same thing with configuring. So there are different modules that are device-specific. There's also one called CLI config that's really more agnostic. But again, the idea with these is we want to use the module, and instead of specifying individual parameters, we want to take advantage of the templating function to combine the variables with that template and then feed it into the configuration module. And that way we take care of configuring that network endpoint. So this is a simple example. So on the left-hand side, what we're seeing here is our variable definition. So this might go into that group vars directory. So we have an NTP server variable and a name server. And over on the right-hand side, we see the template. So again, this is just a text file. And these are the configuration parameters for a network device. And you can see we're using the variable notation just like we would in a playbook, so that whenever the module is invoked with this template and these variables, then what you're going to get out is a file that has the name server and the NTP server defined based on these variables, which is shown here. So that's a very simple example. Essentially, we're just using variable substitution. Now, Jinja 2 also allows you to actually do some coding as well. So this is a little bit more advanced, but on the left-hand side, we have our variable. Again, this is the one that we looked at before. So the variable is nodes. We have 4 routers, and then we have an interface and associated IP address that's defined for every node, for every router. So on the right-hand side, we have the template. And you see some different syntax in here, but essentially everything that is within the brace and the %, so this open close here, is actual code. And so in this case, we're creating a for loop. And so if we break this down, what we are doing is we're looking at this variable nodes, and then we're looking at particular key value here. So we want to look at router 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the way we access to that is through this special Ansible variable called inventory host name. So anytime that you're running a play, if you want to figure out, well, what is the host name that I'm running on, you can actually reference this variable. So we're saying, first time through, for example, I want to look at the values associated with router 1. And then the dot items is actually going to pick up that information. So the first time through, the values that we'll have available are the interface, which is loopback 100, and then the IP address associated with that. And those 2 values are assigned to these 2 variables here, interface and IP. So then from there, once we have the loop, then we're actually just building out the configuration file. And again, we're referencing these variables just like we would any sort of normal Ansible variable that we've defined in the playbook itself, or a inventory file, group vars file, that sort of thing. And so then we've got, again, for each of these routers, we'll have a customized configuration file. And all we've really done is specify two files. We just have the template, and then we have the variables associated with that. So very straightforward. So once we have that, then we actually want to combine it with one of the configuration modules. So we've got a way now to generate that custom configuration. How do we actually get it over to the network device? And that's through the configuration module itself. And so here we're using the agnostic one that's called CLI config. And then the actual config is specified with the config parameter. And so what you're seeing over here is some new syntax. So the first thing is this lookup. And so this is an extension that Ansible provides. And it allows us to actually pull in information, in this case, through the template module. And so we're actually going to use the template and specify the template that we defined previously. So that's this file here. And so it's going to run through that template using our variables, generate a custom configuration file, and then that's going to be passed to and that's what the CLI config module will actually use and to build up the configuration for each one of our routers. So again, just 3 components here that we put together that can very easily specify what the configuration of a huge number of network devices could look like. All right, so with that, let's actually walk through that in the exercises. So we actually want you guys to do this as well, but let me just kind of give you an overview of what we're going to do. And so just like we showed, the first thing we're going to do is define our variables. So you will create a directory called group vars and then define a file. And then you're going to build out your node definition. So we'll use 2 routers. We'll specify the interface and then the values. So that's the first piece. Once you have that done, then you'll actually build out your template file. And again, that looks very similar to what we were looking at before. So we'll have a loop in there. And then, so we'll essentially iterate over everything that's in our variable file, and then we'll generate that custom configuration. Once that's rendered, then we can pass that off to our playbook, which is actually going to then use the CLI config module in conjunction with the lookup functionality to render that template for each one of our router devices. So let's take maybe 5 or 10 minutes and we can go through that exercise. If you have any problems, issues, just let us know in the chat. We'll try to help you out. how's everyone doing on the exercise? You could maybe just put a note in chat. That would be helpful. Okay, good, good. Thanks, Colin. Are you guys at a point where we're ready to move into the next section? Okay, so general question about the lab environment. I've seen a couple of things on that. So these lab environments, you know, we build them up for the workshops and they last for a predetermined amount of time. And we really can't control that. It's part of the workshop environment. And then they're deleted. So this one, I took a look and it looks like it's going to be around until about 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And at that point, it's going to be automatically deleted. So you should have, so we'll just leave it up and you should be able to access the workshop through that time period. Okay. Good. Thanks, Ryan.
Real quick.
No, go ahead. Go ahead,
I was
Matt.
going to say, just a note, I think Casey posted the link to the registration for the users group meeting. Wanted to make sure everybody saw that. The NGINX event posted. If anybody wants or has any questions, don't hesitate to email me, Matt Brown at OneTech. We can get it out to you, Casey, as well. But yeah, wanted to make sure everybody knew that that's coming. It's going to be virtual, obviously, but there's going to be a lot of good content there too. So.
Thanks, Matt. So Jerry, I think we're at a point. Why don't we go ahead and kick back up again? If you want to start the next exercise, I think that'd be good.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with that. So we're going to transition a little bit to Ansible Tower, which is the fun GUI interface for Ansible. So you still write your playbooks the same way, right? You're still working in VS Code or Vim or whatever your tool of choice is, but Tower gives you some really, really neat capabilities. And it's really what makes Ansible an enterprise-wide tool rather than just a targeted tool that one team uses kind of opportunistically. So we'll kind of cover this real quick. I'll go ahead and give a quick tour of the Ansible Tower interface. That's going to be exercise 5. I'm going to go ahead and do that so we can try and get you guys to doing exercise 6, because exercise 5 is just touring it yourself. So if you want to follow along, please feel free to do so. Tower is this kind of next level, right? So at the create level, we're talking about Ansible Engine, we're creating our automation. When we want to scale it out, we're not necessarily talking about scaling execution capacity, although that is part of it. We're more talking about the ability to enable other users to use the automation that you've created. So you can start working with other teams that are also using Ansible, and say your networking team and you have a playbook that removes, nodes from a load balancer or something like that. That's part of maybe a patching process. So an application team might need you to do that before they can actually shut their application down. And then the system administrator team can actually run the patch or take a snapshot and then run the patch. So you can kind of patchwork all of those playbooks together without everybody having to be on like a giant email chain or a chat chain and say, hey, I'm done. And then you wait for the next person to finish in line. You can just put your playbooks together with Tower. So there's a lot of power here. It's really great tool, and it gives you an API that also lets you integrate your automation with other systems like your ticketing system. So role-based access controls, it has the ability to secure your credentials. So rather than making everybody have SSH keys that are on their local Ansible development environment or whatever, you can kind of centralize all of those, and you can control who has access to them. So if you're the networking team, you can be the only people who have access to your networking usernames and passwords and credentials, SSH keys, whatever. Those are saved and encrypted by Tower. And then if you want to let someone else use those, you can delegate that ability to someone else, but they can't actually see the password and they can't actually access it. They can just use it as a credential for their own playbook. So there's a lot of kind of very fine-grained control over how your automation works at the enterprise level. It does provide centralized logging. I think Skip asked about how a security team could monitor what's going on with automation. This centralized logging takes all of that output that you guys saw when you're running these plays, and it puts it in one spot so you can take a look at what's been going on. If there's errors, you can get help troubleshooting. Someone else can just log into Tower and see that as well. So there's a lot of power there. And then the workflows that I mentioned, where you can start using multiple playbooks as part of a workflow from multiple teams. So kind of scaling out into your organization. So this is the entire platform, right? This is the most busy slide I think we have. You can see kind of at the center is Ansible Engine, because that's the worker, right? That's the thing that's actually going out and doing the work. Ansible Tower actually sits on top of that, and it exposes that UI and the API as well. It also gives you all of that role-based access control and the enterprise security that you need to manage all of this. And then relatively recently, I think it was in December, we released some products that are part of the platform that are available on cloud.redhat.com. And that's the Automation Hub and Automation Analytics. So if you're familiar with Ansible already, there's an open source site called Ansible Galaxy that people can share roles that they've created for Ansible. So again, open source, don't start from scratch. Google it first. Someone out there has probably done something similar. You can download their code, read it, obviously, because it's someone else's code. You don't want to just blindly run that. And that's available in Ansible Galaxy. What we've done is partner with folks and make certified collections of that, those roles and those playbooks. So that's collections that Red Hat has actually reviewed and made available to you, so we know that they're secure. So you can download those instead of what's available on the open source side and know that those have been vetted by Red Hat. The other side of that is automation analytics, and that's important because you really want a feedback mechanism into your automation. If you don't have the ability to analyze how healthy your automation is and what organizations in your group you're covering, you're kind of missing out on the ability to improve your automation. So that's where automation analytics comes from, and it'll analyze down to fine-tune things like what's the most used module across your entire enterprise for automation, right? If that most used module is something like a shell command, then maybe it's time to have a conversation about what there's 4,000 modules. There's probably something that can do that in a more idempotent or stateful way. So definitely take a look at that. I'm just going to quickly tour the interface here. So I am, of course, I'm not logged in anymore. Let me grab my password real quick. So once you log into Ansible Tower, you get the dashboard, which gives you kind of a quick picture of what's going on. If you're an administrator for your Tower instance, you can see everybody's activity. So it doesn't matter what team, you can see everybody's. If you're logging in as maybe a networking engineer, maybe system operations engineer, you can see exactly what's been shared with you. So you can create an organization for those groups within this, and those people in that organization only have access to what's in that organization unless they're actually sharing it. So that's an important concept when it starts getting to all of that fun stuff. So we're going to talk about some important things though. So like an Ansible playbook, what you've been running, you need an inventory. Trey went over what those are, but it's done a little bit differently in Ansible Tower. If you have an inventory here, this particular one, if you open it up and you click on the hosts tab, you can see that we have quite a few in here. These were probably not dynamically generated. Oh, they actually came from a script, so that's good. So you don't necessarily want to like go to the host tab and hit the plus button and add these one at a time, especially if you're managing more than say 5 servers. So you have a lot of options for importing your inventory from other systems that are available to you. So you can import them if your infrastructure is in the cloud, you can plug straight into that. If you're using vCenter, you can plug straight into that. And then really commonly, it's a custom script. So I've seen custom scripts that connect to things like SolarWinds, which probably has all of your networking equipment in it and is monitoring it anyway, and you can get your inventory from that. So the custom scripts are written in Python. Just bear that in mind. Again, open source community, Google it first, Someone out there probably has already written it. In fact, that's how I found the SolarWinds one before I started working at Red Hat at my last job. So take advantage of that a little bit. Then Ansible also introduced the concept of a project, which helps you kind of isolate your work. Now, it's the start of thinking about your infrastructure as code rather than just, you know, random changes that you make as you need to make them. So we typically see these checked into Git. It can be GitHub, GitLab, it can be a local Git server. You can use a secure GitHub environment, so you can provide a credential for Ansible Tower to log in, and it'll actually download your playbooks and roles from that. So that helps you start collaborating more too. So you're no longer just having your playbooks on, you know, one server. You can check them out into Tower, and anybody can use them if you want to share them with them. So that's an important concept. We talked about credentials as well. So we'll go ahead and check out this workshop credential. You can see that I am using a machine type. This is what you use to log into your machines. There's quite a few other types in here. We pop this open. Oh, it's not gonna let me. I'll just add a new one. So you can log into Amazon. So you're saving all your credentials for logging into Amazon. If you're spinning up, you know, EC2 instances in Amazon, you can save those here. There's some options for saving passwords from a Vault system. So I think HashiCorp Vault has some options in here. You can look up that information. A lot of the major cloud providers, but the one you're going to see the most often is a machine credential, just because that's what you use to log into a machine. Bounce back out of that. And then when you want to actually go run a job in Tower, you run it with a job template. So that's what actually sets up your playbook that you've written to run. And so we'll go ahead and open this one up here real quick. And you can see that that's the inventory that we just looked at. That's the credential we just looked at and the project we just looked at. And then you get a drop-down list of the playbooks that are available to run. So this particular template is going to run the network commands playbook. So we're going to select the network commands playbook, and we're limiting it to run on the Cisco servers, so the Cisco group. So a lot of these other options deal with kind of operating at a large scale, so we don't usually go over them. But that's a basic tour of Ansible. So I think the next step is actually to talk about exercise 6. So had the tour. Hopefully, if you followed along, you're definitely going to get a chance to get hands-on with it with exercise 6. So you're actually going to build a job template and execute it. There's actually, like, that's it, you're done. So go ahead and start exercise 6 and check it out. It'll be pretty cool. Tower is one of my favorite parts of Ansible. So if you guys have any questions about it, definitely let me know. But go ahead and get started on that. And it looks like we have about, what, 20 minutes left in the workshop?
Yeah.
Okay. It probably won't take 15 minutes, but.
Yeah, let's take about 5 minutes, and then how about we regroup after that? We can get through I think we can get through the remainder. Sound good? Okay, I think given time, we're going to go ahead and get started again. So I will share my screen one last time. And I want to, so in the remaining sections, I want to take a look at a few of the capabilities in Ansible Tower that Jerry first talked about, just to make it a little bit easier to run your automation and to delegate it out and to actually also build out more complex workflows. So instead of just running, you know, one particular playbook or template, how could I actually take multiple things and tie them together? And that starts to become really important when you start looking at involving multiple groups in an organization. So a lot of times we'll see automation might start small. So it might be with, I want to provision a new Windows system. And then it gets into, well, I need to install my application. I need to scan it for vulnerabilities. And so now you've got this automation that is spanning multiple groups. So you've got, you know, maybe a server group and a networking team and a security team. And you want to build out something that's more end-to-end so that ultimately you could maybe just push a button, you know, request an order, and have that automation carry out everything it needs to do end-to-end. And one way to do that is within Ansible Tower. So the first thing I want to show you is a way to specify variables within Ansible Tower. So I think you've seen variables are very powerful within Ansible. It really allows you to control what's going on. And so one of the things that you can do with a template is you can create what's called a survey. And a survey is simply a graphical interface that's going to appear whenever somebody executes a template within Ansible Tower. So if we look at this template that I've defined, you'll see that it's pretty normal here. I have my inventory, the project that we've been working with, and I have a playbook that is set up to simply just specify the network banner. Now, if we look at this playbook, I think it's here. No. Okay. It's a fairly simple one. And actually, it's just a single task. And what we wind up doing is we call this role called banner. And it's going to actually go off and set the banner. But to do that, it makes use of two variables, this network banner and banner type. And these are specified by these two variables here, net_banner and net_type. So I could put those in a file somewhere and include those as part of the playbook. If I'm running this at the command line, I could actually specify what are called extra variable parameters and then specify the value for these. In Ansible Tower, though, I can actually create this survey to capture the input. And so here I built a survey, and I've already built this one, but let's take a look at this first one here. So I've added this parameter, so I've got a prompt associated with that. And then what I'm going to do is whatever the user puts into this, I'm going to capture that into the variable net_banner. And again, that corresponds to this variable here in the playbook. Okay. And then once I specify the variable name, I have different answer types that I can work with. So it could be a simple text field. If I need a password for something that's encrypted, that's available. And then various ways to collect multiple choice kind of objects. So this one is just a simple text area, and I've marked that as required. So that's the first one. The second one then is the actual banner type. And what we're really getting at here in this case is it something for the message of the day, or is it the login banner that we're talking about? So again, I specify my variable, and then instead of just the text area where someone could freeform it in, I specify two things that they can choose from. So it's either going to be login or message of the day, and then I have the ability to specify a default answer. And so I've very easily built this. So now, when I execute this, what you'll see is it gives me these two fields. No, I'll just put some text in here. So I'm just going to specify a login, but you can see I could choose between login and message of the day. And then it previews this for you. So it's going to set these two extra variables, net banner and net type. And then once you launch it, it takes you to the job field, just like we normally would. So you can see that executing here. So in this case, it's actually running through the role. And one thing you'll see in the output is it lists the role followed by the task within the role. So again, it's a way to help you figure out if something were to go wrong, where to go start looking. So this updated. So now if I pop over to any one of my systems, then it's updated my banner there for me. Okay. All right, so that's a quick tour of surveys. And again, it's just an easy way to get input from users and customize how things are going to run. And this might be really useful as you start to look at making these templates available to operators or folks that maybe don't have full privileges to something, to where they can actually go in, run it, and then have a limited set of inputs to work with. Okay, so let's see. All right, let me move on real quickly. Okay. I'm just going to go back to Ansible Tower. So one of the discussion points that came up earlier was around, role-based access control, controlling who has access to what. And within the Ansible Tower environment, there's a couple of ways that you can control this. And one is through this concept that we call organizations. So if we take a look at that in here, you can see that within our environment, we have 3 total set up. There's a default organization, but we've defined 2 in here. If we take a look at the network organization, and we look at, actually, let's take a look at the users. We've got 2 users that are part of this. One is an admin user. They actually have full privileges, and then the network operator user has reduced privileges. So the differences here are an admin can do anything within the organization. But the key thing to notice here is the organizations are separate. So if I were to log out and log back in as network admin, and I came to look at the organizations, what you'll see is I only have visibility into my organization. So within the Tower environment, I might have an organization for the network team, one for the security team, that sort of thing, and divide things up that way. Now within an organization, you can also delegate who can do certain things within the organization. And let me get logged back in here. So if we were to take a look here, and you can do that at 2 levels of granularity. One is at the individual user level, and one is also at the team. If we look at the users that we have here, we've got our network admin, network operator, they're all defined across here. Same thing here with our teams. So we've got the network admin team. So our network admin user is part of that team. But then when you start to look at your permissions, I can do things, for example, like with this template, I could say that the network admin user, in this case, it could be a team, they have full admin privileges. But you can see that the operator only has the ability to execute this. So again, if I pop out real quick, I'm just going to show this network. So again, they only have access to this organization. But now when you come in here and you look at templates, they have access to that template, they can run it, but they have no ability to go in and actually edit anything in here. Same thing with credentials. You can't get to those credentials. You can't, well, I guess you can't get to existing credentials and modify those in any way. Same thing with the projects. So you can't add projects. So by setting up the granularity in this way, you can actually take these templates that you built and make them available to non-privileged users to actually carry out day-to-day kind of operations. All right, let me log back in one last time as admin, and I want to show the one final thing, and this is really around the idea of building out more complex workflows. So when we built, or we looked at templates before, the template is referenced one playbook. But like I mentioned, you can actually build out something that's a little bit more complex. And when you do so, what you're defining is something called a workflow. So you start to build that just like you would a regular template. But then once you define some basic parameters, you have a workflow visualizer that's made available to you. And within that visualizer, you have a canvas where you can then start to build out what that workflow looks like. So in this case, we have a workflow. It starts out by backing up our configuration. And then from there, it actually takes two paths, two parallel paths. One is it's going to run that network banner template that we looked at before. The other path is it's going to take is actually create a network user. And what you'll see here are two different colored lines. So we've got green lines and red lines. So what this is saying is that once we run the backup template, if that succeeds, then we're going to follow the green line. So we'll be doing both of these. If this were to fail, the workflow would stop there. And in fact, if you wanted, if this was a little bit more complex, let's say that we were to run the network user, we could add in another module here, another template in here that says, I want to take this particular action if this succeeded. So here we're taking a path if it failed. But adding in a new component or new template is just a matter of hitting this plus button. And then what's available to you then are all the templates that you've already defined within the Tower environment. So it's really just a matter then of picking the template that you want to add into the workflow and then saying when it is you want to run, whether it's all the time or based on the success or the failure of the previous module. And so again, once we run it, I'll just kick this off. We can watch this run here a little bit. What you'll see is a visual of the actual workflow. And then as it's going through the different stages, you will be able to let's see if this kicks off here. You can actually follow the progress. You can drill in to each one of them. Here we go. So you can drill into it and look at the details of that. So you can see that that particular template ran. It looks like I got an error here because I already had that user defined. So that's a quick overview of workflows, and I think we've got a few minutes left. Well, we can take a look at the questions, but if there are any other questions, please let us know via the chat. Matt, I didn't know if you maybe wanted to say a few words to close this out here.
Something super inspiring, Trey. Yes, absolutely. Trey, thank you. Jason, thank you. Casey for hosting. We absolutely really appreciate it. If anybody has any follow-up questions, we've already gotten a couple notes from some folks that do specific Ansible events for their entire teams. So we're gonna, Trey, keep an eye out for those. But if anybody else wants to do one, we're happy to do one-on-ones. Something more specific to your particular environment. Your network platforms, whether you're Cisco, Juniper, Arista, et cetera. So we can definitely schedule those. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to email anyone from Red Hat or One Tech that's on this thread. We appreciate everybody participating, and if there's any follow-up questions, please let us know. And Trey, real quick, how much longer did you say the workshop's going to be available?
So if I'm reading the information correctly, it looks like tomorrow about 1 o'clock is when it's going to be deleted.
Okay.
So roughly about a little over a day, I guess.
Okay, perfect. And as mentioned, anybody can, anybody that wants to do one of these, we can set up a workshop for any particular team. It's not a problem. So perfect. Everybody, Jerry, I missed you before. Thank you too. And we'll be in touch with everybody later.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody.